Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a collection of hundreds of monster ecology and strategy videos on my channel. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing as I upload at least twice a week. Today we're taking a look at the Wraith. Originally described and designed in Dungeons & Dragons to be an upgraded version of the Wight, which we see this reflected in the corporeal versions of the Wraith found in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes for 5th edition D&D. These are specific to battlegrounds where people have died without any way to defend themselves and their souls have become bound to the material plane, unable to pass on to the afterlife because of the rage they experienced at the last moments of their life. It also raised an interesting question which I asked in the community tab, and thank you very much to everyone who voted on the poll and commented on their thoughts on it. Is a corporeal wraith still a wraith, or is it something else? So, settle back, grab a beverage, we have some delving into the lore of these horrible undead, and it is going to get deeply nerdy. Wraiths are what you could call the returned or trapped dead, unlike the summoned undead such as zombies and skeletons. If we go right back to the original white box set of 3 Dungeons & Dragons booklets, in the second booklet called Monsters and Treasure, it says that a wight is a nasty critter who drains away energy levels when it scores a hit in melee combat. They're immune to ranged weapons aside from silver-tipped arrows, and magic arrows do twice their normal damage. Magic weapons damage them as per usual, and anyone killed or drained to death by the wight will become another wight, as long as it's a humanoid. Wights are described immediately after this. Wraiths are described immediately after this as simply high-class wights, with more mobility, hit dice, treasure, and a bit more damage resistance to silver-tipped arrows and magic arrows. That is it. They are otherwise the same monster. So they are corporeal, and it is the Spectre, as listed on page 9, that is the incorporeal entity with an energy drain twice as effective as the wights and the wraiths. So, the Lord of the Rings is exactly how wraiths were depicted in the original D&D games. Let's find out when wraiths became incorporeal, shall we? Because they have been that way in my games for such a long time that the very idea of the corporeal wraith just seems a bit weird to me, when really I've been mixing them up with the spectres this entire time. First edition's monster manual shows a very dark and shadowy figure that looks much like a shadow, more like a shadow than a physical entity, and state that the wraiths are undead, similar in nature to wights, but they existed more strongly on the negative material plane. They are found only in dark and gloomy places, for they have no power in full sunlight. They have that vulnerability to silver and magical weapons, as well as being splashed with holy water, and there's some mention is made that they are immune to cold, and their touch causes cold damage as well as draining life energy, with the victims raising as wights if they were humanoids. Again, these are corporeal entities, more like a wight than a spectre. Moving on to 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons and the Deluxe Monster Manual, we flip through this massive book, and hey presto, here is where the Wraith becomes incorporeal. Very clearly it says that they are undead spirits, and that these horrible creatures are usually seen as black, vaguely man-shaped clouds that have no true substance, but tend to shape themselves into having 2 upper limbs, torso, and a head with 2 glowing red eyes. This shape is a convenience born from the habit of once having a human body. They are the silent, evil spirits who normally exist in packs because it will be some powerful individual and their family members who were entombed together. They raise again because they are evil and gain pleasure from murdering the living, who will raise as wraiths themselves and join the others in the tomb. It also says that only powerful characters can even get an answer from these beings when they cast a Speak with Dead spell, because the wraiths scorn the weak and hate living creatures, so they look down on them. They exist more in the negative plane, energy plane, than the prime material plane, and are not a unnatural part of the world, so all animals will shun them and stay away. So clearly the designers took the ties to the negative material plane to mean that these things have no physical body, departing from the relationship with the wight and being much more like a spectre. They kept the cold damage and the energy drain, kept the half damage from silver weapons and full damage from magic weapons, and they appear to make the black vapours boil away from the body of the wraith when they get hit by magical weapons. Also, a Raise Dead spell will utterly destroy the wraith. These are still very much a humanoid undead. They attack humans, halflings, elves, and dwarves and crossbreeds in preference to all other living beings. They have remained incorporeal undead for the next 3 editions, including the core monster manual for 5th edition. But in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, the Sword Wraiths are the risen dead. They have a body. They are going right back to the original game and walking around very angry as a somewhat upgraded wight. So the truth of it is that the versions in Mordenkainen's are actually far more accurate to the original depiction of what a wight is supposed to be. Personally, I prefer the incorporeal ones, but you're free to use either version. They both exist in the lore of the game. It's fine. There's no right or wrong way. This is just the narrative and whatever you need to tell your stories. Dragon Magazine has a couple of undead articles including the Wraith, including a Wraith template that can be applied to any creature that was originally corporeal. So, stepping even further away from this being a strictly humanoid undead, Dragon 300 has the Merfolk Wraith, there is the Kobold Wraith in the pages of Savage Species, these are given as an example template, and Dragon 234 has the Wraith Undead Dragon. In 3.5 edition, they love to make all sorts of versions of creatures. The Wraith was no exception, so we had the Dread Wraith, the Evolved Wraith, the Sea Wraith, the Orb Wraith, the Incarnum Wraith, and the Acid Wraith. The 3.5 Monster Manual says the Dread Wraith is the oldest and most malevolent, lurking in the depths of the forgotten temples and other forsaken places. They can sense the approach of living creatures and hunger for them. These Wraiths, for some reason, are upgraded to large size and move at 60 feet per round, having a spring attack feat, and their attack is a 10-foot reach, so they're very deadly hand-to-hand. While draining life force, the Wraith also feeds itself, it heals itself, and if it's killed someone, they raise as a regular Wraith in just 1d4 rounds, robbed of all their abilities and their free will, and are now enslaved to the will of the Dread Wraith. Libris Mortis, the Book of the Undead for 3.5 edition, tells us that these powerful undead who are still around after 100 years have managed to absorb more and more negative energy, transforming into the Evolved Undead. This is a template that can be applied multiple times to any undead creature with some sort of intelligence as it continues to exist for centuries. An interesting concept that could be applied to a whole lot of different monster types. A Wraith is always lawful evil. A Wraith appears as a sinister, spectral figure robed in darkness. It has no visual features or appendages except for its red, glowing eyes. The Ring Wraiths in Lord of the Rings appear as armoured and cloaked figures, but aside from that, what they're wearing, they're almost invisible. The Witch King is a great example. It appears to be a masked crown and body armour, cloak, and riding a huge undead Nazgul, but the Witch King is invisible even when it has a sword stabbed into its face, causing it to seemingly implode as there is a sudden release of negative energy. Sauron himself went out the same way when his physical form was destroyed, except the release of negative energy was sufficient to knock at least 3 whole armies prone. He then survived as more of an incorporeal Wraith that was bound to the material plane by his cursed artifact-level master ring of longevity and ethereal form. It's not a ring of invisibility. In Dungeons & Dragons terms, it just popped the wearer into the border ethereal, which is why the wearer seems to vanish to the eyes of the living, but the eyes of the dead can see them just fine. And in the movies, Frodo gets to see what the ring Wraiths actually look like in the ethereal plane. Spoiler alert, they don't look very healthy. Not having a good time at all. Again, taking our lead from the inspiration for the monster category, we see that a Wraith can rise from the grave within its original body, being more like a wight that has not yet accepted that it is an undead spirit that no longer needs a physical form to exist. This is an important distinction as it explains why the Sword Wraith warrior and the Sword Wraith commander found in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes do not have the ability yet to drain the life from a victim. They are still obsessed with the glory of battle and the honourable death that they were denied. They tend to lay dormant unless something sets them off and they get charged up with emotion, animating their broken body and attacking with martial fury. So they attack recklessly, their undead body taking lots of damage but being resistant to all non-magical attacks and necrotic energy, immune to poison, exhaustion and so on. A good example of this is in Lord of the Rings again, in the army of the dead that is honour bound to serve the true king of Gondor. However, it has been a really long time since they died and they don't have any functional bodies left to animate. But the spirit doesn't decay away to nothing, it lingers on, growing in necrotic power. And we see that necrotic power unleashed against a whole fleet of pirates and many orcs and goblins. You could say that a wight is in between this stage and the final form of the Wraith we see in the 5th edition core monster manual. The wight is motivated to wage war on the living. It is perpetually pissed off and looking to hurt any living being, and they have learned how to feed on the life force and have the power to kill people in such a way that they will raise as zombies under the White's command, so they're mastering their undead powers. Eventually, even a White's physical form will waste away to nothing, or the being may have been consumed by whatever killed it in the first place, so it returns to the material world without a body. This is the incorporeal Wraith, the final form of the vengeful, intelligent spirit. The manual tells us that the Wraith is malice incarnate, concentrated into an incorporeal form that seeks to quench all life. The creature is suffused with negative energy, and its mere passage through the world leaves nearby plants blackened and withered. Animals flee from its presence. Even small fires can be extinguished by the sucking oblivion of the Wraith's horrifying existence. That is a lot of negative energy. Again, in Lord of the Rings, the black pupil at the centre of the flaming eye of Sauron on top of the tower in Mordor is actually the super powerful Wraith, pulling in magical power to direct the armies of evil and scry great distances. This is seen in the fight between Gandalf and Sauron in the Hobbit movies, where Sauron is moving around cloaked in shadow and fire. The whole fight in Dol Guldur Fortress was the most D&D thing I've ever seen, an actual high-level encounter such as one would see with characters beyond level 15, so Elrond, Galadriel, Gandalf and Radagast facing off against Sauron and all the ring wraiths. So yes, Sauron was a wraith. He even crafted magic rings that sucked the life force and free will out of beings that he eventually turned into more wraiths. It is completely legit Dungeons & Dragons. In 5th edition, the Wraith creates spectres instead. However, it no longer has to have been one that was killed directly by the Wraith, and it can just be transformed nearby. They just have to target a body of someone that's been dead for no longer than a minute who died violently. So they could be walking through a battlefield or something like that and just raising up people. The Spectre will rise up adjacent to its body and immediately under the command of the Wraith, who can then control up to 7 Spectres at a time. This is very handy for some sort of more powerful undead, such as a Lich, as it allows them to quickly build up a lethal force as they can fuel and command the Wights, who in turn, or the Wraiths, who in turn can create and command Spectres, and no self-respecting evil Lich would be caught dead without a cadre of very angry spirits around it at all times, if you'll pardon the pun. The Wraith still has that weakness to silver from the very earliest editions in the game. They are not powerful in sunlight anymore, not powerless in sunlight anymore, they're just merely sensitive to sunlight, which I think is a bit of a step back. They do need some sensitivity to sunlight for sure. The energy drain is way simpler to use in combat. I always thought level loss and ability drain was a real pain in the ass as a DM. I love the idea of reducing maximum hit points. I also throw in some house rules about gaining levels of exhaustion, typically as a lair action though, with limited usage, representing the oppressive supernatural evil that the Wraith radiates like a beacon. They can move through obstacles and living beings as though they were difficult terrain, but take force damage if they linger inside an object, which is a great distinction as it prevents them from basically being completely undetectable and unkillable because they will just retreat into a physical object and stay there. The Draining Touch is +6 to hit and does a whopping 4d8 +3 necrotic damage, which appears as a blackening of flesh, a peeling of skin, fraying and greying of clothing, skin and hair, that will seem to wilt and decay like it was a sped up time lapse of a film of a bowl of fruit rotting. You probably could, if you wanted to up the ante a little bit more, the draining effect could actually heal the Wraith as well. The target must make a DC 14 Constitution saving throw or have its maximum hit point total reduced by the same amount of damage it just took. This is good because it's not automatic, which means that there's a chance that they could withstand that draining effect for quite a while, which is an effect that lasts until the victim has a long rest. It's very cumulative. This is a deadly attack as it reduces the maximum hit points, which means that even if they're being healed during combat, they can only be healed by so much, and that amount keeps getting lower and lower until they either win or drop to 0 hit points and die. As they are intelligent undead, they plan, they plot, they scheme, and most certainly hold grudges against their enemies, and they can take as long as they want to get revenge against them. They are dead and they have eternity to wait, watch, scry and plan, and they can move, they can travel anywhere on the world. Again, huge thanks to those of you who took part in the poll and left so many thought-provoking comments on the subject. Hope this video answered a lot of your questions and cleared up the mysteries of the evil spirits. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content, all the full scripts for these videos, buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride, check out Patron Blades for a mighty smooth shave, and as always, thanks for listening and I'll be back with more for you very soon.